Hey everyone, this is a short piece from Gerard Delanty from the journal Thesis 11. It's titled Civilizational Analysis and Critical Theory. Gerard Delanty, the reason that one of the things I know him from is he's the editor of the Routledge Handbook of Cosmopolitanism Studies. In this contribution to the 100th issue of Thesis 11, I would like to address the tradition of critical theory with which the journal has been closely associated. A distinctive feature of Thesis 11 has been a concern with the critical analysis of the present as well as a concern with critical appraisal of history. This has been reflected in a particular kind of historical sociology. I think Gerard Delanty also edited a handbook on historical sociology, which has been developed by one of the journal's prominent editors, Johan Arneson, under the title of Civilizational Analysis. Let me see what comes up for this guy. It says I'm not really finding great stuff or great snappy definition, but it seems like he's written some books. Come on. My internet's not working. Oh well. Johan Arneson, who, under the title of Civilizational Analysis, the work of Arneson was firmly rooted in the tradition of critical theory and more generally Western Marxism, though the author has been heavily influenced by Weber, Castoriadis, and Merleau-Ponty. Arneson's later work, some of it published in Thesis 11, has been concerned with what he termed civilizational analysis and the cultural dimension of state formation in comparative perspective. The origins of civilizational theory lie less in the critical theory tradition than in Weberian comparative historical analysis, as in the seminal works of Benjamin Nelson and S.N. Eisenstadt. It says Benjamin Nelson was a sociologist who explored the historical development and nature of civilizations. He lived from 1911 to 1977 and held positions at University of Chicago, University of Minnesota, Stony Brook University, and after 1966, the New School for Social Research. Nelson was a Guggenheim Fellow for the academic year 1945 to 46. Nelson was a founder, member, and vice president from 1976 to 1977 of the Society for the Scientific Study of Religion, and the first American president of the International Society for the Comparative Study of Civilizations. So that's who Benjamin Nelson is. S.N. Eisenstadt is, let's see. Shmuel Eisenstadt was an Israeli sociologist who lived from 1923 to 2010. He was born in Warsaw and died in Jerusalem. In 1959, Eisenstadt was appointed to a teaching post in the sociology department of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. From 1990 until his death in September 2010, Eisenstadt was professor emeritus. Eisenstadt held countless guest professorships at the University of Chicago, Harvard University, the University of Zurich, the University of Vienna, and the University of Bern, Stanford, and the University of Heidelberg, among others. Eisenstadt received a number of prizes, including the Balzan Prize and the Max Planck Research Prize. Eisenstadt was also the 2006 winner of the Holberg International Memorial Prize. God, can you just stop talking about this guy's rewards? He was a member of many academies, including the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the Advisory Editor's Council of the Social Evolution and History Journal. His daughter, Irit Meir, was a noted scholar of Israeli Sign Language. In the field of sociology, Shmuel Eisenstadt became known as a, quote, sociologist of youth, end quote, after the term from generation to generation, a work closely related to the ideas of Talcott Parsons. However, this is a quote, Eisenstadt's research contributed considerably to the understanding that the modern trend of a Eurocentric interpretation of the cultural program developed in the West is a natural development model seen in all societies. ... The European model is only one. It was merely the earliest. It started the trend. But social reactions, whether in the USA, Canada, Japan, or in Southeast Asia, took place with completely different cultural reagents. End quote. Frankfurter Rundschau, March 22nd, 2000. So that's who Shmuel Eisenstadt is. But the influence of Marxist historical analysis is also apparent in Arneson's grasp of the intersection of culture and power. With remarkable scholarship, Arneson has explored the civilizational background to the emergence and transformation of modernity in cases as different as Russia and Japan, and Arneson has offered a persuasive assessment of the rise of the West that questions the presuppositions of post-colonial accounts as well as the received scholarship of the West. What is clear, and my topic in this contribution, is the relation of civilizational analysis, with its characteristic concern with the hermeneutical dimension of power, to critical theory, with critical theory's emphasis on the critique of power. If civilizational analysis is to offer a foundation for a critical theory of modernity, both the normative implications of the theory need to be clarified as well as a more explicit account of globalization in the formation of modernity. Until now, this remains undeveloped, and Arneson has avoided normative conclusions. Indeed, Johann Arneson insists on terming his approach civilizational analysis as opposed to civilizational theory to avoid any normative misunderstanding. In this short piece, I wish to make a case for a critical cosmopolitan social theory of modernity, which encompasses both the aims of civilizational analysis and the normative concerns of critical theory. New section, Critical Theory and Modernity. From its Hegelian and Marxist origins, critical theory has been characterized by the normative critique of society. Critical theory differs from other theory traditions in that critical theory aims to identify the sources and mechanisms of domination in order that social actors can improve their circumstances. As a theory of modern society, the distinctive feature of critical theory has been the identification of possibilities for self-transformation within the horizons of a given societal context. In this respect, critical theory's epistemological approach is an approach of immanent transcendence in that social reality is presumed to contain within social reality the means of social reality's own transformation. Thus, self-transformation is a key dimension of the modern condition, as reflected in political consciousness and collective identity, cultural self-problematization, and the advancement of the normative horizons of society. The condition of modernity is one in which social struggles determine the course of history by the transference of their content into the political and legal fabric of society. The starting point for a critical theory of society is the objective reality of crisis, and its perception by social actors who act on the basis of the experience of injustice or the desire to find an alternative to the status quo. A particular way of experiencing the present leads to an interpretation that constitutes the political subject as an agent of history. The social struggles involved, including the epistemic struggle to define the problem situation, have given to critical theory a strong normative direction that has on the whole led it away from microanalysis in favor of macroanalysis. While current fashion dictates microanalysis, with Foucauldian theory as the predominant influence, critical theory remains an important source of macro theorizing. Viewed through the lens of critical theory, modernity is, in the terms of Arneson, 1991, quote, a field of tensions, end quote. In that, modernity is not the product of a single force, but the interrelation of several forces. Thus, we can view modernity as set in motion by the interaction of state formation, industrialism, and capitalist market societies and civil society. But to speak of modernity is to invoke a cultural logic by which societies or collective actors undergo a transformation in their self-understanding. Modernity is the experience of a world in crisis, but a world which the political subject can act upon. Thus, in the most general sense, modernity is the perception that the world can be shaped by conscious human agency. The social theory of theorists as diverse as Castoriadis, Lefort, Mouffe, Heller, Habermas, and Turenne has provided the most rigorous defense of a conception of modernity that preserves space for the self-constitution of the political subject. The political subject is not reducible to the projects of elites or a meta-narrative of increasing progress or the emancipation of humanity from domination. It is indeed the case that critical theory, and more generally the Western Marxist tradition, has been much troubled by this apparent obsolescence of specific political agency. Both the social structural conditions and cultural and political assumptions of the older theories have been rendered problematic today by numerous developments, not least of which are the emergence of new kinds of politics. The enduring relevance of critical theory rather consists of its way of conceiving of the political subject as shaped in social struggles arising out of particular ways of experiencing and interpreting the present. The political subject is today being constituted around diverse streams and is indeterminate, since it is the outcome of numerous struggles by all those seeking to reclaim the political space: migrants, outsiders of all kinds, industrial workers, low-wage workers, the victims of crimes, even the middle class. The challenge for critical theory is that the political subject is no longer easily conceptualized within the contours of a Western definition of society. As is well known, in recent years, the very term society has come under fierce scrutiny. Global communications, which can be taken to be the principal mechanism of globalization, have particular implications for how we theorize the political subject. One of the main weaknesses of the critical theory tradition has been its failure to address alternative histories of the world in the context of globalization. This has led to accusations of Eurocentrism, an ill-defined term to be sure, and post-colonial critiques of the West. As an alternative to the polarized positions that have become popular today, which either see a clash of civilization or colonialism as the only way to theorize modernity, civilizational analysis offers a more nuanced and differentiated account of civilizational encounters. Civilizational analysis is an alternative to the Agamben speculative approach, which projects a unilinear and undifferentiated historical Western narrative onto all facets of the political condition of modernity. Civilizational analysis. A key notion in civilizational analysis, as originally elaborated by S.N. Eisenstadt and taken up by Johann Arneson, is the notion of a radical reflexivity and creativity built into the civilizations of, quote, axial age. That is, those that are associated with the major world religions, and which have provided the basis for divergent historical paths. That civilizations refer to the cultural modes of interpretation which first arrived with the onset of writing, and which interact with particular processes of state formation to produce distinct complexes that are more than national patterns but are also never contained within geopolitical units. Civilizational analysis draws attention to these modes of world interpretation, which of course are variable, but have the function of providing orders of legitimation for political and cultural projects. Civilizations differ in their pattern of state formation and in their cultural modes of interpretation, but have in common, according to Eisenstadt, a differentiation of the world into a transcendent order and a mundane order whereby cultural and political elites attempt to realize the former and the latter. The result is that civilizations are perpetually transforming since there is no final consensus, and there are always different interpretations. Conflict is endemic to civilizations, and with the development of modernity, this takes ever more reflexive and creative forms. There is a further and crucial element to this. Civilizations develop not in isolation from each other, but in interaction with others. This interactive dimension, first stated by Benjamin Nelson, has been particularly stressed by Arneson, who has provided the basis for a reappraisal of the rise of the West that avoids, on the one side, what might be termed an internalist account, which attributes to entire internal characteristics of Western ascendancy, and on the other, the externalist account, which contributes everything to Europe's appropriation of the non-West. This corrective, as Johann Arneson terms it, is a welcome corrective, but remains undeveloped, and yet surely has much to offer in providing civilizational analysis with what civilizational analysis needs, namely a normative theoretical critique of current political reality. Civilizational analysis aims to identify common trends while avoiding one, the discredited evolutionary theory of Western civilization as a universal normative standard. 2. The idea of distinct civilizations that develop in isolation from each other. And 3. Notions of civilizations as engaged in a perpetual clash. Against the latter, the main counter-thesis is that civilizations are internally plural and the site of divergent orders of world interpretation, and it may indeed be the case that these are more extensive than differences between civilizations. And that right there, I think, is fundamentally the critique of this kind of like, I guess like the post-colonial sphere that kind of like, at least to my understanding of it, I'm not an expert on post-colonialism, but the idea that there's like, there's this kind of like homogenous like civilizations that are distinct and uncontradictory, and unified in themselves in some capacity. So for instance, like, when people kind of like, kind of view like, I don't know, say like third, like middle, countries in the Middle East, or they view them as like kind of like these homogenous like cultures, right? Versus another homogenous culture. There's like an authentic, like real, like culture in one place, and the relationship it has with the other. They face each other as kind of, I guess, basically saying like the West and other and the non-West face each other as like homogenous blocks, right? Which is but kind of erasing the differences that exist within those societies. So like maybe like an extreme example of that would be like in the case of Iran, like if someone was saying that like it's very like, Western chauvinistic to impose your moral standards on the Islamic Republic of Iran, as if there isn't like an opposition, however repressed, in Iran, and that there isn't or that like this or like the idea that like the West in and of itself is not stratified, that there's generalized cohesion in the West towards societies and cultures that exist outside the West, and there's not, right? There's the idea that like the West is inherently, I don't know. I mean, not that it's not a tendency in it, of course, but to just say like just the entire West is just, homogenizing and expansionist and all this, that, and the other thing, necessarily seems a mistake. So like I've been talking too much, but I'm basically just saying that like civilizations are contradictory and stratified, of course, and there's different tendencies within them. I'm just going to repeat the sentence that I just fucking talked about, for the sake of continuity, or for the sake of making this easier to follow, so I'm not just starting from a new sentence after going on that spiel. Civilizational analysis aims to identify common trends while avoiding 1. The discredited and evolutionary theory of Western civilization as a universal normative standard, 2. The idea of distinct civilizations that develop in isolation from each other, and 3. Notions of civilizations as engaged in perpetual clash. Against the latter, the main counter-thesis is that civilizations are internally plural, and the site of divergent orders of world interpretation, and it may indeed be the case that these are more extensive than differences between civilizations. This is not the place to consider further the debate around civilizational analysis. I would like to take up one of the main outcomes of civilizational analysis for critical theory, namely the notion of multiple modernity. As outlined by Eisenstadt, civilizations contain within their cultural modes of world interpretation the basic animus of modernity, a heightened kind of reflexivity that becomes the basis of visions of human autonomy. To varying degrees, modernity becomes embroiled in the major civilizations. While Eisenstadt has argued that modernity becomes a new civilization in which there are multiple forms, Arneson has argued for a less strongly formulated position on modernity as a new kind of civilization. In Shmuel Eisenstadt's formulation, modernity should be seen as a second axial age. At this point, the discussion becomes somewhat confused, and civilizational analysis has not made much advance in formulating a theory of modernity. The argument appears to be that modernity has been influenced by its civilizational context, and the diversity of civilizations has produced a diversity of forms of modernity. But to invoke the notion of modernity is to posit a commonality, in that the variety of its forms reflects a common dynamic. Without this commonality, modernity would be simply a numerical condition and of little explanatory value. If this dynamic is the transformative logic of radical reflexivity and the assertion of human autonomy, then modernity conceived in post-universalistic terms is not specific to the West, with which it is often related. Indeed, within Europe itself, there may be different models of modernity and different civilizational patterns. It is a further and more complicated question whether modernity is taking a form that undermines modernity's civilizational background, leading to multiple modernities in which the civilizational content has lost its capacity to determine a civilizational complex. This is where a perspective on globalization becomes particularly relevant, since globalization can be seen as the short term to describe the intensity of inter-civilizational interactions. What we term globalization today is nothing more than a greatly accelerated scale and intensity of global interconnectivity that commenced with the emergence of the major civilizations. It may be the case, and it is Eisenstadt's thesis, that this is leading to a new kind of civilization, which in Eisenstadt's view is disproportionately influenced by Western civilization and is global in that it is not rooted in any one civilization. Johan Arneson has more cautiously suggested that civilizational contexts still remain relevant, but only insofar as they interact with modernity. Thus, a more plausible interpretation might be that the current situation is characterized by combinations of civilizational contexts and a modernity that is not broken free of specific civilizations in the direction of post-civilizational global modernity. However, there is still some confusion here, for if modernity is conceptualized as emanating from within the dynamics of civilizations, it is hard to see how modernity is also a separate entity, constituting a civilization of its own and of which it crystallizes into different civilizational forms. As a possible way forward, I'd like to make the proposal that the notion of multiple modernity, or varieties of modernity, is one of the most significant contributions from civilizational analysis for social and political theory, be theorized as a condition of translation whereby civilizations and their local forms interact with trans-civilizational modes of interpretation, producing outcomes that are highly variable. The culture of modernity may be comparable to the axial age, civilizational breakthroughs as a second age axiality, in which case we are still living in this era of change. But the significance of the current situation is surely one of an enhanced interaction of civilizations and their local embodiments. New section. Conclusion. Cosmopolitan orientations. The interactive dimension of civilizational encounters, which Johan Arneson has highlighted, would appear to offer a basis for a critical theory of modernity. It is through interaction in a global context that modernity takes shape. An interactionist account of the rise of modernity stresses the dynamics and modes of interaction, whereby different parts of the world become linked through expansion and diffusion of systems of exchange, networks of communication, cultural translations, and various forms of cosmopolitan third culture. The normative implication arising out of a conception of modernity as a condition of global interaction points in the direction of cosmopolitanism as a dialogic condition. While Arneson does not see any link between civilizational analysis and cosmopolitanism, in my view, this link is the unavoidable conclusion of a post-universalistic theory of civilizational encounters. Cosmopolitanism, understood as a condition in which cultures undergo transformation in the light of encounter with the other, can be most vividly illustrated with respect to civilizational encounters. This can take different forms, ranging from major reorientations in self-understanding in light of global principles to reevaluations of cultural heritage and identity as a result of intercultural communication. Cosmopolitanism concerns the broadening of horizons when one culture meets another, or where one point of view is forced to reevaluate its claims in light of the perspective of the other. The end.